Aphoristic Appendage to On Truthtelling. 701 to 750. 701. Screaming headlines day after day. Scandal after scandal. But 15 or 20 years later, who can tell you anything about them? 702. Monuments in ruins retain a certain grandeur because whatever meanness they have can be attributed to the work of time. On the other hand, whatever meanness could be attributed to the times in which they were worked has been eliminated. 703. It seems almost inevitable that, in certain areas of human development and interaction and over varying periods of time, public morality will swing from the most outrageous insensitivity to the most incredible hypersensitivity. Now, if these drastic changes of judgment and sentiment had nothing to do with the fact that morality itself can be immoral, that it can be used as a weapon, or that it can easily have a fashionable or expedient side, then the end result could hardly be viewed as objectionable. The fact that it usually is seems to indicate that morality itself is every bit as complicated as human nature, and that its cherished principles, whatever else may be said, are part of a grand oversimplification. 704. Some are able to shine like a star for a moment or for a period of their lives, but, apart from this, they live very much like the rest of us. 705. A widespread shortage of food and water in the Western world, even if it didn't last too long and lead to mass starvation and other catastrophic events, would shake things up so badly that many current issues would simply drop off the public's radar. It's quite likely then that, with the return to relative normalcy, the political and moral landscape, apart from the most conservative elements, would no longer be recognizable. 706. The worst thing about getting old is that it effaces even what was only a partial everyday sort of glory. 707. There are innumerable things in this world about which there is not the least reason to be secretive or deceptive, and yet, despite this fact, are shrouded in mystery. What chance is there then, if there be any chance at all, of getting to the bottom of matters routinely covered up or lied about? 708. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. This was once nothing more than a light-hearted joke about journalism. 709. Yellow journalism was once an identifiable part of the profession. 710. The mind is so malleable that, in the corridors of power and in the company of those where corruption can raise its flag, it often takes on the likeness of the devil's own, save for some mitigating factors such as a smiling face, kindness towards friends and family, a sense of duty, and so on. 711. The greatest country in the world could very well have as its credo, "We're all for peace, but, if you get out of line, we'll bomb you back to the Stone Age." 712. In international affairs, it's common practice to look for the mote in one's enemy's eye while ignoring the beam in one's own. 713. To think that all the processes that keep a person alive, biological, psychological, sociological, and so on, would have to be tracked in nanoseconds to give the most complete account of them. 714. Some see in this political leader a good heart. Others see a grotesque exterior. Don't you see that both could be right? B. Well, it so happens we're partisans, and, since he's our man, we say only the first is true, namely, he's great. C. Well, it so happens we're partisans, and, since he's definitely not our man, we say only the second is true, namely, he's a monster. A. And so it shall forever be, for what is at stake here, at least for two such contending parties, is not what is true or right but the winning claim. 715. Politics can be a blood sport, and when it is, we're all involved, no less than the spectators at a bullfight. 716. Beauty and strength will certainly go, but wisdom, courage, integrity, and a good heart can last a lifetime. 717. Discourses can range from the most formal to the most familiar, from the most sincere to the most hypocritical, from the most elegant to the most inept, and from the most sublime to the most coarse and obscene. Given all this, what can one say but that there is an incomparable wealth of fruit and fertile soil in this most extensive and diverse of gardens that even includes what's necessary as fertilizer? 718. King Lear made the third biggest mistake of his life at the very end of it. He gave away his kingdom to his two treacherous daughters while casting out his one true daughter, who had also been his best loved one. His first biggest mistake was openly favoring this daughter, the youngest of the three, from the very moment she was born and with little concern for the other two. Never at any time did he take into consideration that, as small as they were, they showed definite signs of being aware of the situation. Never did he pay attention to information he received about their picking up on some of the palace talk concerning his obsession with the youngest. Finally, never did he heed their complaints about their sisters being treated in a way that, despite what they themselves enjoyed as luxury and privilege, surpassed what their father and a few others in the court reserved for them. It should be mentioned that, besides Cordelia's bearing a striking resemblance to her deceased mother, there were long-standing rumors that her sisters, Goneril and Regan, were illegitimate. Lear's second mistake was, in the attempt to deal with certain behavioral problems the two older sisters developed, putting them in the care of two plotting and extremely duplicitous aunts. The harm done to them by this can hardly be exaggerated. While the youngest, raised in the court by a devoted nurse and instructed by the best tutor in the land, was properly groomed to be a princess. It was in this context that Lear's first two mistakes came back to haunt him and, when combined with the third, proved disastrous. The third mistake was in fact three. First, he misinterpreted a few seemingly harsh and unfeeling remarks his youngest made when he was about to bestow on her the best part of his kingdom. Second, because of their fawning and flattering talk, he was fooled into believing that his two oldest daughters loved him more than the youngest. Third, he ended up rewarding the two schemers by giving them his entire kingdom while banishing the youngest without a dowry. In short, his two oldest daughters, once they had charge of him, stripped him not only of certain privileges but his dignity, reducing him to poverty in the end and to such a pathetic state that, before he went mad, he wept over his foolishness and raged and howled at his terribly ungrateful children. 719. When it comes to making the worst threats and accusations, the vast preponderance of talk on the world stage is hot air. However, the relatively small number of fires that flare up and burn is still sufficient to make it all seem lively and relevant. Occasionally, of course, it does end with an out-and-out conflagration. 720. Evil may spring up under our very noses yet unbeknownst to us and with ourselves as its unwitting instigators. Evil will spring up. 721. As pithy expressions that combine comprehensiveness with conciseness, it's hard to beat, from the cradle to the grave, or, from the womb to the tomb. 722. What truth-teller isn't in danger of being compromised as a public speaker if he becomes popular and has to keep an eye on the entertainment value of his talk? 723. If truth were what we wanted throughout our lives and on every occasion, there would be no lying or being fooled by lies. 724. One thing is certain, whatever subject one raises for discussion in the public arena, it will get its share of stupid as commentary and criticism. This doesn't change from generation to generation. 725. Few things are more common than voicing a strong opinion based on the desire not to be right but to be thought to be right. 726. If one would like to know how secure one is in one's ideas and beliefs, one should imagine being before a tribunal or learned judge whose ideas and ways of thinking are diametrically opposed to one's own. 727. When the father looks at the son or the mother looks at the daughter, he or she peers into the past as much as the future. 728. It's much more likely that a hierarchy will reverse itself than dissolve or dismiss itself. 729. If one were to go by what has been officially said in modern times to justify military actions and campaigns, one would have to admit there has never been one not well-intentioned and even humanitarian at heart. 730. Food for thought, the plain meal way of serving up knowledge, to put the matter figuratively, can't compete with the haute cuisine or junk food ways of doing it, to extend the metaphor, except over time. 731. Of all the great rules of life, perhaps the most popular or prevalent is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Perhaps the second is, tell the truth. And perhaps the third is, do your best. On the other side of the ledger, there is the great principle of war which dictates that the first two be seriously altered or reinterpreted while the second read as, do your best by doing the worst to the enemy until your last drop of blood. 732. The question for the future shouldn't be how to live longer but how to live actively longer. 733. What makes large-scale lying so effective time and time again is that it gives people so much of what they want to hear. 744. Any falling away from human perfection is someone's point of entry. if they are malicious, for mockery and ridicule. This is the crueler side of comedy. 745. The world is so incredibly perfect that it allows even those who want to perfect it their day in the sun. 746. He who runs with the crowd runs the risk of losing his head to the crowd. 747. It should come as no surprise that, in politics where winning counts for so much, fairness to others can fly off at any time. 748. Every generation that springs up into the world thinks it's something quite new, whereas in fact it's part of something quite old. 749. In the media, everything that is different or divergent is put under a magnifying glass and, as far as the optics go, becomes mainstream. 750. The great paradox of politics lies in the contrast between its ends and its means. The first often has the character of highest things, the second the lowest.